All right, so we have Rabbi Yitz Rosenberg. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like if you're FFB, what derech are you on, what community you belong to? Go ahead and fill us in.
I'm the assistant rabbi of, I guess you would probably call it a modern Orthodox community. So I guess that's the community I belong to. In terms of my background, my background is basically traditional German Judaism. I'm, a lot of people today would call that Young Israel. And yes, I know that many Young Israels, started, or rather the shuls that are now affiliated with the Young Israel movement started as Russian, etc. But the movement historically was majority German. If you look back into the background of most Young Israels today, you will find German communities. And also that's true of a lot of the older conservative shuls. There was that sort of grouping where Germans sort of straddled the divide between the Orthodox and the conservative movement, which they/we mostly founded. And of course, Young Israel itself was a joint venture of the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism and the Orthodox Union. And the Orthodox Union representative was a young man named Mordechai Kaplan. So that, it's gotten much more from than it started out.
Mm-hmm. Well, initially the conservative movement was really a left-wing form of modern Orthodoxy. I think it wasn't until the 50s that there was that big split that the Rabbinical Assembly ruled that you could drive on Shabbos, and then JTS, and then...
That actually is actually one of those big, not misunderstandings, but I think incredible oversimplifications. So if you look at the Adler driving tshuva, and you can look it up, it's in English by the Rabbi Morris Adler. It's presented as basically a heter to a conservative rabbanim that yes, if somebody's already driving on Shabbos, you can ask that they go to shul without, without doing anything else if they're already going to be driving, for the sake of their children who might then actually keep Shabbos later. And, this is within a hair of the current practice of Chabad in most smaller communities, where there's the wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I can't tell you to come on Shabbos, but there's a parking lot here and we don't close it on Shabbos. And, at least back in the day, people had the decency to, park 2 blocks down the road. But I think, and also at the beginning, the real difference was more one of German versus Russian and Lithuanian, and also just a more, for lack of a better term, there's that book, How the Irish Became White, defining white as sort of the dominant European American culture. Conservatives were shuls that are affiliated with the conservative movement were generally more middle and upper class, and were people who their membership was generally more white and less ethnically, Russian, Jewish, or whatever. These were people who generally had a much more established, foothold, and these shuls were all built a lot earlier, et cetera, et cetera. And so that basically was just snobbery was a big part of why the conservative movement started. And that was also then when you had all the white flight in the 60s and 70s, and you had, really 50s, 60s, 70s, and even greater affluence. There was this great move to the suburbs, which, proved to be the undoing. Because back in the day, the laity of your average Orthodox shul and your average conservative shul, there was a small observant core of, Shemra Mitzvahs, and then there was just, everybody else like you have, like you would call that in Israel Masorti today, not the Masorti movement, obviously. And then when you go to the suburbs, that from core, just there's no more real walking community, and you just kind of lose it. And so I think that much more than the driving tshuva was, the driving tshuva was like a consequence of that. It wasn't the thing that caused it.
You mentioned Young Israel. So the founders of Young Israel were actually JTS grads. Initially, the conservative movement didn't have an issue with having separate seating. I mean, most synagogues, the way they were built in America was similar to the way they were built in Europe, which is the only semblance by Chazal of a mechitza, which is that the Ezra's Nashim was on the second floor. But that also began to disappear after the 50s. But in terms of driving in the Orthodox community, I know the average Chabad house wouldn't have a minyan if they didn't count people who drove there. It's been a common practice also in the Litvish world. A famous posek, his name is David Cohen. I believe it's Yavitz Kavua.
Wow.
And he basically said the same thing, that it benefits them to drive to shul and keep some semblance of Shabbos and to stay home or go elsewhere and do many more Averas. But I think the conservative movement, their initial statement was that they were allowed to go to their closest synagogue and then return home. And then now, the average person who goes to a conservative synagogue is Reform, and the average person who goes to a Reform synagogue is atheist.
And I think that's fairly right. And again, that I know Rav Cohen. I've never heard of that particular shade of his, but that's again, that sounds much more like the Adler driving tshuva than what people commonly make it out to be. The other interesting thing is way back in the day, in 30s through 50s, about half of Orthodox Union member communities did not have mechitza, had mixed seating, and about a third of conservative communities had separate seating. And it was only with Rav Soloveitchik in the 50s, 60s, and 70s really pushing mechitza that you eventually forced all the quote capital T traditional shuls to make a choice. And the last actually member of the Orthodox Union in good standing was BMH Beis Medrash Gadol in Denver, Colorado, with mixed seating, and they left in 2016. So there has been, there was for a while a decent Masorah of not having a mechitza, which again is not to say that that's today that's an acceptable halachic option, or necessarily that it even was, but at one point it was within the realm of minhag halacha that people do.
I was actually a member at BMH, but this was in 2013. And back then, the way they kept themselves good standing with the OU was that they had a chapel.
Yeah, the second thing.
Right. It's called Shari Simcha, that did have a mechitza. Actually, the rabbi who ran it was Rabbi Franklin, and he's a Talmud Muvhak of Herschel Schachter, who placed him there. So it was always an experiment in terms of keeping them within the OU as a Kiruv synagogue. Not only did they have mixed seating, they also used the microphone, which really, halachically, it's not an issue. I mean, if people are going to accept other products produced by this organization called Somet that creates things, like the Shabbos Amigo scooter and things that, I guess, to be more primitive means to be more religious nowadays. But yeah, cool. So, what do you identify with now, hashkafically?
I mean, hashkafically, I've gotten to the point that, everyone politically these days, it started out with the social justice folks, and then it became just sort of how everybody approaches all political and hashkafic disagreement, is that the other side always has to be evil. I generally when you see real evil or something that really is causing an issue or is a threat, I think you need to name it for what it is. But I'm shomer mitzvos, so I kind of just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you had to put a name on me, I would say socially liberal, but I guess also socially conservative in some ways, but somewhat socially liberal, somewhat dissident, yeshivish, rabbi who's the assistant rabbi of a modern Orthodox shul and is anti-religious Zionism, but all his friends are religious Zionists. So, yeah, it's that's the thing. I think people are a lot more complex these days, for better or for worse.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain your position regarding Zionism, or your opposition to Zionism, or religious Zionism?
And that's why I make the distinction between opposing, the existence of the state of Israel versus opposing religious Zionism. I think that there's basically three big Mashiach Sheker movements in Judaism right now. One is obviously the majority of Chabad, the Yechiniks, and then the other I would say is the Shmuley Yanklowitz crowd. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are Mashiach, the Tikkun Olam crowd, and then Tikkun Olam as Mashiach, and then there's this. Reishis Tzmichas Gulasenu, like that. There is this understanding that religious Zionism pushes this understanding that the Medina is Gola, that it's not even the beginning. That's what it is, and that you can't. The greatest good is to move to the Medina. For halakhic purposes, they start such as Teruma Meiser and a lot of other things. They start how many days Yontif do you keep? Even though in the Gemara the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael are very firmly fixed. There's things to the north of Akka and things down south that are definitely not part of halachic Eretz Yisrael are treated as part of halachic Eretz Yisrael. And they say, well, we conquered it, we took it, whatever, it's part of it, we annexed it. But again, Bibi Netanyahu, love him or hate him, no one, he was not Mashach. No one ever took oil and stuck it on his forehead. Mm-hmm.
I think most Haredim within the Medina believe that if you live in places like Eilat, well, you have to keep a 2-day Yontiv.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I think that's just pashut. And that the only reason that there is any machlokes about this at all shows me that this is going too far. That I grew up learning about Golda Meir in Limudei Kodesh, not Limudei Chol. Like we learned like that's how it is at what you would call modern Orthodox Jewish day schools everywhere.
You're in Bnei Akiva. That sounds like.
I mean that's like you're talking in Brooklyn. It's how it is at Yeshiva Flatbush, a very great school. It's how it is at Ramaz. It's how it is. Like basically, just look on any either in the New York area, out of town, wherever across the United States. And look at the mission statement of any day school, and it'll put, service to the Medina, love for the Medina specifically, as part of their quote halachic values or something similar like that. I mean, I could go on Google now and find one, but you can just look this up.
You won't see Beis Yaakov you're promoting this or Beis Chana or Beis Rachel. It's more.
They're not religious Zionists.
I also don't consider myself a religious Zionist. I consider myself an anti-religious Zionist and a pro-secular Zionist. The truth is, the only true secular Zionist that still exists is Alan Dershowitz. Yeshai Leibowitz is of the approach that one could support the existence of the state just like you support any democracy. But like you quoted that passage from the Tefillah Medina, I'm not convinced that this is the first signs of the redemption. And this is typically the approach of most Haredim in Eretz Yisrael, most of the non-Zionist group, not anti-Zionist, but non-Zionist. That means they benefit from having a falafel shop in every corner and a place to send your kids after high school, but they're not going to march alongside Palestinians like Natur Karta does, or
of course. And I think that's I didn't actually expect to be talking about the Zionists so much, so I'm trying to gather my thoughts here. But so yeah, I actually just typed into here's the Ramaz was I think the first school I mentioned. It said under their mission statement, you go to their webpage, a commitment to Torah mitzvot and Ahavat Yisrael, and love and support for the state of Israel. Like that's under their religious commitment section of their, then they go on to knowledge, intellectual rigor, and everything else. And that really is there's this wave of indoctrination, and it goes to this point. There was one of the Facebook groups that I spend way too much time in. There was one of these liberal Jews posted on Tisha B'Av, like, what do anti-Zionist Jews do on Tisha B'Av? Like, do they still celebrate it? Like, and us understanding that obviously the Torah Carta just hates Israel, but that, that the hate of that if you're an anti-Zionist, you must hate Israel. And that means you hate, and because they conceive of Medinas Yisrael and Malchus Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael as being just all inseparable. That if someone is opposed to the Medina, then they must have enjoyed the Churban, right? So how could they mourn it? And which is just nuts. But that's the thing, is that is where this line of thinking goes. And you look again. You have the Rabbanut Harashit. Which you could just Google Rabbanut bribes kosher kashrut whatever, and you'll find 20, 30 articles right away. You have these people that are basically jacking up food prices by 30% in the Medina, and are so corrupt that you can get them to like give hashgacha de chazer, and probably literally, and where I actually one of my good friends actually works as a mashgiach for Rabbanut, and he doesn't really care about his job so much. It's a way to get a paycheck. And he said the reason he doesn't go into restaurants, like if they have bidats, then he trusts the bidatzim to look after it. And if they don't, he's like, well, nobody from is going to eat there anyway. And so why do you have this? So you're forcing this giant bureaucracy, this giant corrupt bureaucracy, in the name of Judaism as the official representatives of the most official, because it's in Israel, most correct, most authentic form of Judaism.
Yeah, I don't think anyone takes them seriously regarding kashrut. I lived in Israel for 5 years, and I know Burger King was under the Rabbanut, Kentucky Fried Chicken was under Rabbanut.
Exactly. No one takes them seriously.
Like, all the From Jews always ate mahadrin. It wasn't a question, or Reuben chickens. It's only for, I think, tourists, or just so they have something to give the irreligious in the country. So when they do feel semi-religious, for whatever reason, they have an outlet. Not that they're trying to replace kashrut amongst the Jewish people. Like you said, the members of the Rabbanut won't even eat from their own hashgacha. I think that's more extortion. They know it's kosher. It's actually harder to get non-kosher food in Israel than it is to get kosher food. Right? I mean, with the exception of perhaps beef that you could buy from the Muslims, but chazer is not an issue. The Chalav Yisrael is not an issue because there isn't pig's milk available in the country. When I lived in Israel, I ate Rabbanut because I knew that it was all a joke. But I could go to, Rami Levy and buy something with Rabbanut Hashgacha, or go to Ezra's Torah and Eidech HaCharedis and pay twice as much. For what? Yeah, it's a mafia.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is the mafia exists because of the state involvement in it. And I guess that's the thing, is that you have a secular state where you have, bareheaded 400 shekels Bibi Netanyahu. You know the 400 shekel reference, right?
No.
Yair Netanyahu, the mamzer son of Bibi, was caught on tape. You look this up. There's the tape. It's tapes online. He got caught on tape. He was out with a friend at one of the Tel Aviv establishments, and he wanted to borrow 400 shekels so that he could avail himself of the services of a lady of the night. And he said to the friend, on tape, why can't you give me 400 shekels for this act of pritzes? My father got your father this $20 billion deal. And so it's like, if you're going to say that these are the people, it's like, whether you like him or not as a politician, you can say that he's done a great job as a politician, fine. But is this the person that should be, as it is, in charge of deciding who is the, quote, Rabbanut Harashit of Eretz Yisrael?
Right.
Does this have any legitimacy? This is where religious Zionism gets you.
I think to be true to Likud, they typically would leave that up to groups like Degel HaTorah and Shas to fight over. I don't think they get involved too much.
Yeah, but it's the fact that the buck ultimately stops with them as it goes. That so Degel HaTorah and Shas are generally filled with relatively firm people, but they debase themselves and they get drawn into this because Israel didn't have a separation of religion and state to begin with. And there's this messianic Zionism that pushes it where, they say, like, how could you live without a Rabbanut? It's like, it's like without the Rabbanut controlling, and this is one where I think everyone can agree it's a mess, marriage and cure. Like, how could you avoid the mamzeres? It's like, I'm not a mamzer. I don't know any mamzerim in the United States. We don't have a government Rabbanut here. We managed to not be a mamzerim. Again, the only real mamzer that I know of is, again, Yair Netanyahu. So, come on.
Is he halachically a mamzer? What do you mean? That his mother was married without a get?
There's Masakas Kala that that in Azpanim, that this is someone's a real Azpanim. This is a simon. This gives some pause as to their yochas, like they might specifically the opinion of Rabbi Akiva is they're the mamzer and the ben nida if you're really big Azpanim. And so I like with Yair Netanyahu and the 400 shekels, it's gotten to the point where to me that's just overwhelming and presumptive evidence.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you. Israeli politics is really.
But, obviously, that's again mostly Lashon Gazma, but still, it's knowing how the Netanyahu family operates, it wouldn't shock me. But no, that's. But the whole point is that you don't need a Rabbanut, a government Rabbanut, to prevent mamzeres.
You mentioned the Tikkun Olam movement. This is interesting because I never thought of it like that. I never thought of the left-wing streams of Orthodoxy. I don't know if you would include Yeshiva Chavavei Torah and the Avi Weiss group in that movement, that it being considered some sort of messianic movement, because it does seem like it.
Oh, I think this is more among like the liberal Jewish movements, which again I think YCT doesn't really fall into that category, but there definitely are people, like especially Shmuel Yanklowitz and Avi Weiss, a few others that are associated with YCT that push it pretty far into just the primary focus of their hashkafa of their practice. Also that it's like protesting while wearing a talis is not an act of tefillah. That's why I think it was Yanklowitz. I don't want to say for sure. It was one of the guys in that chevra though. And when someone pointed out, like, why are you always wearing a talis? He's like, because this is an act of tefillah. I'm like, no, tefillah is an act of tefillah. This is a protest.
They were against people wearing talisim? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
There was some. One of the guys in this chevra was like, someone asked, like, why do you always wear a talis at all these, social justice protests? And he's like, well, it's an act of tefillah was the response. And sorry, tefillah. They all that, not just that Israeli accent, but that American trying to do an Israeli accent that always somehow ends up sounding French. I can't quite do it, but yeah, he said it's an act of tefillah, And yeah, that is actually how they feel about a lot of it. That social justice, tzedek tzedek tirdof, is like the big, slogan you hear, and they really make it into this, again, the focus of their entire religious practice. And at some point, and I think this is also the point with Chabad, it's like at some point when it takes over, when the primary focus of your religious practice is whatever your messianic obsession is, and is not, Torah and mitzvos, and when you start quoting, say, the last Chabadsker Rebbe more than you quote Moshe Rabbeinu, more than you quote Chumash, it gets to a point where it has utterly distorted. Even if you don't officially, formally cross some, black letter halakhic line, it ceased to be traditional rabbinic Judaism at some point, and it's become something else.
Where did you learn?
Basically, almost all Litvish yeshivas and Batei Medrash, and I grew up traditional Jew, going to traditional hyper Zionist schools. So,
you said that you were socially liberal. What do you mean by that?
I'm trying, and that's why I kind of hedged that a little bit as soon as I said it. That I'm definitely, I think I'm definitely in favor of a lot of things that, for instance, just having children, making children and family the primary focus of your life, etc. That at this point, used to make you just a normal person who could be socially liberal in other things, and now this makes you a horrible bigot. That even supporting gay marriage now is actually a horrible bigoted right wing thing. They call it homonormativity, that you're trying to make gay people like straight people by having successful marriages and families and everything else, that no one should have one of these things. So in that sort of modern social justice sense, I'm definitely not a social liberal, but in the classical sense of having individual freedom, keeping, again, human authorities, whether they're human halachic authorities, Leiba Shamayim Hi, or whether it's government authorities, out of people's personal business as much as possible, and saying that you have, in addition to collective responsibilities, that you should have individual rights, individual conscience. I think that is something that, at least in the Yiddish world, is not as accepted, and and doesn't have as much of support as I would hope it would.
The way I view groups like Chabad or any other groups that I happen not to see eye to eye with is that there are certain things that we have to believe. There's probably a handful of things that we have to believe in Judaism, and a lot of things that we have to do. And as long as we're adhering to those beliefs and those actions, that is what identifies you and solidifies you as a Jew. And everything else, if one is able to acknowledge them as extracurricular beliefs or actions or ideas, then they should be tolerated. Whether it's believing your Rebbe's the Messiah, trying to usher in some messianic age that, from at least the Peshat Torah level, doesn't really exist, right? I mean, it's not really spoken for. Anything, if you want to assume that your Rebbe sent you a letter from heaven to give you further instructions on how to act, as long as you make a distinction between that and source material and what's considered authoritative in our religion, then we should be able to tolerate it. The problem
absolutely.
is...
And yeah, sorry. No, no, you're about to get to what the problem is, and I completely agree with you. And that's why I was saying I remember, like, one of the few things I remember about you before we connected on Facebook the other day was, everyone was really up in arms when you said that, technically from a, again, a black letter halakhic legal standpoint, you could, believe that, Rav Yashka was Mashiach, and, that there's nothing technically usher about that. And everyone got up in arms, and that's just completely correct. If you stop at Mashiach and you don't go into any of the actual Avodah Zarah, and you then don't do what I think you're about to say you can't do, then yeah, there wouldn't be a problem. It's just that no one actually doesn't go farther.
Right. Even what people would consider Avodah Zarah, or the actual Avodah, that they accuse Messianics or even Christians of, I still would consider that within gray area, that hasn't been completely condemned and exposed by Chazal. They just didn't mention it. So, unless there's another Sanhedrin, I'm not sure how they would go about developing one. It seems like this is something we have to tolerate. I really opened the door for these guys. But you said they don't stay there. So it takes those of us who are more mature to build up such a movement and crowd behind us that we can force them to comply, force them to behave. Because might makes right. Once you have the crowd on your side, and then things will sway in that direction. But the thing is, Judaism today, people are too heavenly good, they're no earthly good. You think to these YouTube rabbis who are super mystically inclined, they speak for Judaism. And that's why there's so much division. My goal is to build bridges, not just between Messianics, but between Lubavitchers and students of Panovich. That, we're throwing each other under the bus because of these extracurricular ideas, these developed ideas that don't necessarily go against Torah. I don't think believing that the Rebbe is Mashiach. Huh?
Yeah, that's actually, absolutely. Saying the Rebbe is not the Mashiach by itself, I actually would have a lot less objection to than someone like David Berger would. But I think the thing that you were leading to before I interrupted you earlier was that, that if you maintain that differentiation between what is actually Torah and what is your shtus, and it's that increasingly, Lubavitch doesn't maintain that distinction, and there are a bunch of different ways where it really starts just impacting just the mitzvahs. It starts impacting the behavior and what they actually do in very destructive ways.
So regarding David Berger's book, the Rebbe, Orthodoxy, the Rebbe,
the Rebbe, Mashiach, and the Scandal of Orthodox Indifference.
Right, there we go. So I think his goal was more to reveal the hypocrisy that exists within not just Orthodoxy, but Chabad themselves, how they're quick to throw other movements under the bus and make fun of these other movements just because they don't want to accept the tenets of their belief system, Tanya and all this stuff, while at the same time claiming to be normative and claiming to align themselves with the teachings of the Rambam and this and that. And I think that's what David Berger, and I think Gil Student also does a good job at exposing a lot of the hypocrisy. Because of Lubavitch, it's helped me view Messianics in a different light. And not just Messianics, anyone. Now, clearly, if you're a student of Shabtai Tzvi or Jacob Frank, that's already immoral behavior. But
this is the thing. Shabtai Tzvi gets a very bad rap. So Jacob Frank, who was born, I believe, 50 years after Shabtai Tzvi was nifter. Jacob Frank, had all the orgies and all the other shtus, and was just went to some crazy, highly immoral, non-consensual, very bad places. Shabtai Tzvi, the only thing that he ever did that anyone can even try to pin on him that was actually usher was the conversion to Islam, which again, pretty much l'chol hadeos, Islam is not avodah zarah. He still remained a practicing Jew to the end of his life. In fact, he was his last letters were obtaining machzarim for community for Yom Kippur, and he died. We are now learning with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Baruch Down Hamas, that it's a great zechus to die during the Seres Yimei Tshuva. That's when he died, after having gotten to the machzarim, and yes, and he never renounced Hashem. He never renounced Yiddishkeit, but under pain of death, he pledged allegiance to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire and to Islam, in that it's not avodah zarah. It's not Yarek Valyavar. You're probably supposed to save your skin and say something that's stupid rather than get killed. And the reason that he had to say this was there were European Jews that were just moving to Turkey to move into Israel. And literally, the best that any of the Menachem Mendel Mashiach people can get is that Rav Aaron Soloveitchik said that this is utter shtus, but it's not usher to believe it. At his height, Shabtai Tzvi had an outright Rav Poskim behind him saying he was Mashiach, and that's why the was caused. So that's the thing. So yeah, like I think that even Shabtai Tzvi gets a very, very bad rap, and he also, Rav Ebershitz, it turns out, actually was
a Sabbatean,
a Sabbatean. And again, you're talking about one of the Gedolei of all time, the Gedolei Yisrael of all time, and
he denied it, by the way.
Of course, everyone publicly denied it after Shabtai Tzvi, was after. But yeah, there was
Rabbi Natan of Gaza. He introduced Shabtai Tzvi as this great Torah scholar and Mashiach. This is before the whole Matir Surim scandal that we know, the famous part of the Amida that teaches that God frees the bound, but he reinterprets it. He makes mutter isurim, and because of the Kabbalistic idea that one has to gather the sparks, and one way of gathering the sparks in some way doing evil in the sense that you're going against what the Torah actually tells you to do, just to in some way fulfill some Lurianic understanding and bringing.
But going after Nassim of Gaza, and again, his argument was, the thing that the Chabadskers will always do when you call out some of the things that they believe in, some things in Likutei Sichos, a lot of the things in Tanya, they'll say, you just have to learn on a deeper level. There was, with Nassim of Gaza, there was some deeper levels to some of that. And also, going after Shabtai Tzvi for Nassim of Gaza is like, going after Yashka for, what Paul wrote. It's a little... Mm-hmm. There is a differentiation.
I still wouldn't qualify Shabtai Tzvi as falling into gray area. There's even rumors that the Rambam converted to Islam, although he never mentions it in his text. So, converting to Islam in itself wouldn't be such an isser. But I think they viewed converting to...
Well, it is if you do it voluntarily.
Well, he did it to save his life. Because...
Yeah. Generally, you're probably supposed to if it's to save your life and you're not specifically denying Judaism.
In terms of Shabtai Tzvi, I wouldn't give them as much of an allowance as I would Breslever Hasidim who follow Rabbi Israel Desser. Who's this guy in Israel? Rabbi Eliezer Berland also is some sort of a messianic figure. Yeah, the notion of the Messiah is not one that's clear in the Chumash. Right. The Rambam in Sefer Mitzvot, the closest thing he has to believing in Mashiach is Parshat Shoftim, and really the Reshut to establish a king, when we want a king, but that's not really what Mashiach looks like nowadays. That's why it makes no difference who someone thinks the Messiah is. It really makes no difference who someone acknowledges as a prophet either, as long as you believe that prophet can add to the Torah, which that wouldn't include Muhammad, because he clearly did add to the principles in the Torah. But yeah, all these things are not really set in stone. And also the notion of Yamot HaMashiach seems as a later developed idea. It seems that a messianic age, according to the Torah, is any time Israel is living back in the land in a redemptive state. That means this is not our first.
And you know the gematria of Yamot HaMashiach, right?
No.
814, and Mashiach HaMisi, the true Messiah, is 814, and Shabtai Tzvi also 814. So I always, I'll quip whenever the Lubavitchers get really out of hand, they just write 814 is greater than 770. The little mathematical greater than sign.
What's your connection with Chabad?
I think just I have had very, very varied travels. I've got, I've been actually, unfortunately, affiliated in, again, worked at synagogues where there have been failed Chabad takeovers, Baruch Hashem failed. But the takeover business is part of my, window into Chabad, and also and on the flip side, on the positive end, I've been zeicha to know a lot of very interesting and Chabad individuals, Chabad affiliated individuals, and I've also spent a fair amount of time in Crown Heights, and you've been inside the mothership itself at 770, and so I've gotten a fairly broad view of the movement and how it operates.
How do you view converts and conversion?
I'm probably around. I'm probably a little less gung ho than you were, say, 3 years ago, but not by that much. I'm right around the Chuck Davidson sort of line, where again I think it's in the Mesachas Pesachim, we're in Galus to make Gerim, and that's one of the things that really does bother me about the behavior. This has nothing to do with the Mashiach. This just happens to have been one of the big interests of their false Messiah. But this Noachide movement, it's such a just terrible thing all around when you're saying, okay, we don't really do gear, but you can be a second-class citizen in Judaism. It boggles the mind. There's no such thing as like a Noachide Masorah. You have these like Chabadsker and now some, again, also slightly messianic religious Zionists like writing up all these fake Noachide Kesubas and fake Noachide
Sidurim and all this literature.
Yeah, and it's just awful. And it's okay. If you don't believe that Christianity is our bishtuff, I believe it is. So if someone wants to not become Jewish but wants to follow the Sheva Mitzvahs, I'd say here's a nice church you can go to. Or if you do believe it's just Avodah Zarah Gomer, you can say, well, okay, here's a nice mosque you can go to. Go there, say the Shahada, go with God. But but taking away the ability to be a member of a community, and a full member of a community, you can be part of our like local Chabad communities, but it's as a dhimmi, it's as second class citizen, no voting rights, and you just have to follow these made up, horribly worded chintzy rituals that we make up for you, and there's no Masorah, there's nothing. It profoundly bothers me. And it also, people always say, like, what does this look like for the Jews? And I generally think those are not always the best arguments. But in this case, it really does just look horrible to have, like, the Jews setting themselves up as, this priestly caste in this, very parasitic relationship. And, I actually looked up, and I'm struggling with whether or not to give the names. People can look it up on Facebook themselves. But there's this person from Brazil whose Facebook last name is Bat Noach, and she posts all these videos of like her Noachide community, and like one of those, like, she has these two like beautiful little children of hers, two little boys, and they're dancing in like just clear religious fervor that they've been taught to do, in front of a big screen TV that's showing like Farbrengens at 770 with the Rebbe speaking. Mm-hmm. And, it's just, this is obscene.
Mm-hmm. So you think that if someone is serious about Judaism, they should just convert?
Yeah, if you're into Chabad Judaism, you should convert Chabad, and Chabad should help you with it. And if they're not willing to, then convert somewhere else, and maybe reassess, look into some of, Tanya and how it views, Goyim a bit more maybe look into some of Chabad's other theology. But yeah, like, either we do Gior or we don't. Either someone's going to help you convert or they won't. But yeah, anyone who finds himself in that position, the quote Noahide option is, BS.
Right. Well, that's exactly how I feel. But I go a little further. I mean, I encourage people to become Jewish. Not that they have to become Jewish, but I think we should have an open door policy with a friendly person inside when they come. I consider that proselytizing. How do you feel about that?
As I said, we are in Galus to make Aram. I think, again, there's some, Mesach Silamais that talks about. Sorry, maybe I got the corona again. The first time was bad. Now I've got this cough again. I think it's just allergies. But there's this. You have to tell someone that nowadays we're all persecuted, etc., which, depending on where you are exactly, may or may not be true now. But just because you're warning someone about the downsides doesn't mean that if someone is interested in Judaism, you shouldn't actively pursue. And again, if you're not willing to really endorse and promote your community as an option for people to join and your tribe, but like, what does that say about your commitment to, in your opinion, of the community and the tribe?
I think we got enough here to keep my audience educated and entertained. But I appreciate you coming on. I mean, that you brought up a lot of good points.
Thanks. Sorry I couldn't be more entertaining.
You're definitely very entertaining, and I think we're kindred spirits on a lot of areas, on the areas that matter. I know you're trying to keep this a little anonymous, but do you have a website or something you would like to promote?
Oh no, I try not to promote too much. I think this is the thing. I think you can do so much more. In terms, if you really want to do good in an area, like say, like Uski, or I think you can either really get a big reputation and get like a power base behind you and make change that way, or you can just sort of fly under the radar and change your little corner of the world free from outside scrutiny. And I definitely am not a person talented enough to get, at least politically, to get that big following. So I generally try to just fly under the radar. So I definitely don't want to promote anything, but it's been a great conversation, and